Hello, I'm Landon Schlungen, and in this video we're going to go through the React challenges. So what is React? React is a open source JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So it's a front-end JavaScript library. A lot of people call it a framework, but it's actually a library. I guess I'm one that likes to call it a framework as well, because it makes writing our HTML and JavaScript so much easier. And it's definitely very useful for making whatever kind of applications you want, and hopefully I'll demonstrate its usefulness in these lessons. So let's go to the first lesson now. Create a simple JSX element. So right here, this is a JavaScript file. You can tell we're in a JavaScript file because we're using const here, but we want to basically put HTML in our JavaScript, and it's called JSX. So they call our HTML that's in our JavaScript file, they call it JSX. And basically what we want to do is we want to take our div and change it to an H1 and replace it with the text hello world. So we'll put hello world in here, and it really shouldn't do anything yet, but I guess they're doing some stuff in the background to make it display. But yeah, that's all we have to do for this challenge. Let's move on. Oh, it should be hello JSX actually. And now let's move on. Yep. Create a complex JSX element. So also with JSX, you have to return it in a one div block. It can't be separated like this. And there's different ways to do this without using divs. Like we can use fragments, which are just this. And it's basically saying there's nothing there, but you need it to return our JSX. So for this challenge, we want to have a constant called JSX that equals a div that contains an H1, a P element, and 3 list items. Copy that down a couple times, and that should be all we have to do for this one. Oh, I can include any text I want in these, I guess. So there we have our text and it's rendering, so let's try it. Oh, I need a UL around the LIs. So there we go, we have our unordered list, and now let's try it. Yep, there we go. Add comments in JSX. So comments are like this, pretty simple if we can do command slash. So we're gonna add a comment here, command slash. Maybe we'll add it in here, I guess not. So I guess we have to actually just copy this over. And then what do we want to say? We'll say here's a comment. It actually doesn't do anything. It's just for notes. And I think that's all we have to do for this. Yep, render HTML elements to the DOM. So this is the part that they are kind of doing in the background. What we actually have to do is we have to grab this React DOM.render and paste it down here. And then inside of it, the first argument is our component to render, which in this case is JSX. And then our target node that we want to append it to is document.getElementById and the ID of challenge node. And there, now our JSX renders. So yeah, this part is automated in a lot of our projects. So a lot of times we don't have to write this code, but it is useful to know how it works and to know what it does. Basically just takes our components and it puts it onto our HTML, because we have this other HTML file that has a div with an ID of challenge node, and that's where the JSX is being put so that it can render this content. So let's try that out. Yep, define an HTML class in JSX. So classes in JSX are done with class name instead of class, because class is a reserved word in JavaScript. So for this challenge, we want to take div and give it a class name. So basically a class equal to my div. And now div has a class of my div, except it's stated as class name, because you got to remember that we're in a JavaScript file when we're writing this, and we can't use class because class is a reserved word in JavaScript. So instead we use class name. And then for on click and on change, they're camel case instead of all lowercase. So there's another change. So that should be all we have to do for this one. Let's try it. Yep. Learn about self-closing JSX tags. So like other self-closing tags, we can do self-closing tags in JSX as well. So I'll remove these comments here and comment out this line and this line, and then we will do self-closing tags. So put a backslash or forward slash there, put a forward slash here, and that should be good to go. These comments are still rendering because this isn't actually how you do comments in JSX. So instead, I guess I'll just delete these, and there we go. Just make sure we have our self-closing tags. Let's try it. Yep. Create a stateless functional component. So right here we have a function, and it's going to be called a component or my component, because in React we break things up into components. And basically what we want to do here is we want to return some JSX from this, and the JSX that we want to return is just a empty div, or just a div. So I'll put our div here and we'll add some text into it, and it shows up because they're doing some stuff in the background. We can also use arrow functions here. So instead of doing function, we can do arrow function, and it behaves the same exact way, except it's a little bit cleaner. I like to use this way instead. And that should be all we have to do for this challenge. So let's try it out. Yep, create a React component. There's multiple ways to define a React component, and this way is using the class keyword. And this is actually a kind of old way of doing things. In my opinion, we should just be using functional components just because it looks a lot cleaner and we don't need this constructor props, super props type dealio in here. And also we can just do return instead of this render return, which is also kind of weird, but it's helpful to learn both ways of doing it. So for this challenge, we would just want to return. What do we want to return? We want to return a div that contains an h1, and the h1 has hello React inside of it. And there we go, we have hello React. So let's try that out. Yep, create a component with composition. In this case, we have two components. We have this child component, which is a functional component, and we have this parent component, which is a class-based component. And what we want to do is we want to put this child component inside of our parent component. And how do we do that? Well, we grab our child component by doing a tag of child component and making sure it has the same exact name as up there. And now child component will render right here. So I'm the child, which is what this one says, is rendering right here. So it's basically taking this and it's moving it down here. That's what it's doing. But in this case, yeah, that's exactly what it's doing. And we're basically just doing that so that it's broken up more. Instead of all being in this one class or inside of this one component, we can break it up into multiple components, and we can also reuse this component like multiple times. So if I do 2 of these, then it'll do that twice, which is really cool. And this is already super useful to know. And there's a bunch of use cases where this is used. So very cool. Let's try it. Yep. Use React to render nested components. So in this case, we have 3 components: this types of fruit component, the fruits component, and the types of food component. And what we want to do is we want to take types of fruit and put it here. And then we want to take fruits and we want to put it here. So that's pretty simple. All we have to do is take our types of fruit and put it in tags and self-close it. And then we want to take our fruits and we want to put it here. So we'll do our fruits here, fruits, and self-close it. And there, now we have our fruits that renders this off of the fruits component. So that's kind of cool. Let's try it. Yep, compose React components. For this challenge, we just want to put our different components inside of these other components. So first of all, we want to go to our fruits component and we want to add in a non-citrus and citrus component. And these are added in for us behind the scenes, so we don't have to write them or we aren't even seeing them, but they are actually there. Non-citrus and citrus. And then I'm guessing this fruits component isn't being put anywhere, and I'm guessing we want to put it here. So I'll put fruits here, and now it should render our citrus and non-citrus. Yep, and that should be all we have to do for this one. So let's try it out. Yep, render a class component to the DOM. So we have to do this again because they're not doing it for us behind the scenes. So I'll take this line of code and we'll render our types of food component. So I'll just copy this and instead of component to render, do types of food. And then instead of target node, we want to grab our document.id, document.getElementById, and we want to grab our challenge node. So there it's rendering types of food now that we did this. And then we want to also add our fruits and vegetable components. So we'll go fruits and vegetables, and there's our fruits and vegetable components. Sweet. Again, a lot of times we don't have to really write this, but it's good to know. And let's move on. Yep. Now we want to write a React component from scratch. So let's get started with that. We want a class called myComponent, and it extends React.component, and then we open it up, and then we have our render method in here, and it's going to have our return. And what do we want to return? We want to return a div with an h1, so we'll go div with our h1 in here. So there we have our div with our h1, and our h1 should be my first React component. And it's okay if you don't remember all of this to start with. The more you write it, the more it'll stick in your mind. Just try and get the concepts down. And then we want to do the react.dom.render thing again. So yeah, react.dom.render, and then we'll render my component, if I spell it right, and we want to render it on the document.getElementById and challenge node, and it should show up now. Yep, and there it is. Beautiful. And that's all we have to do for this one. So let's move on. Maybe not. My class. Yeah, this is why I don't like using classes for my components, because we have to do this constructor thing. Although actually, I believe you only have to do this for the parent one. So it should be constructor and then have a super in here. Just call it a super, and now it should work. No. Oh, I need props in super, and I also need to pass props in the constructor, I think. So now let's try it. Yep. Okay. Now we want to pass props to a stateless functional component. This is done by putting a prop inside of the tag that it's using. So in this case, we have a welcome component and we're giving it a prop of user, and the user has data of Mark inside of it. So for this challenge, we have two components, current date and calendar. And what we want to do is we want to pass a prop into current date. And the way we do that is we grab our current date tag and we put a prop inside of it. And we're going to have date of equal to date, which is a vanilla JavaScript function that will grab the current date. And then we want to render it inside of this component, because right now it's not using props at all. So the way we actually use props is we can do props.date inside of our template using brackets. And basically whatever is inside these brackets is valid JavaScript. So that allows us to do props.date on it. And it's grabbing this date right here, which is Tuesday, October 6, 2020, which is the date today. So pretty cool. Let's try it out. Yep, pass an array as props. So for this challenge, we want to pass some arrays for the props for list, and it should be called the tasks property, and it should equal an array. So first we'll do our brackets to indicate JavaScript, and then we'll do an array of walk, dog, and workout. I think we can do whatever we want here, but I'll just do what they have suggested. And we also want to do it for this second list, and then we want to actually render it out with the props up here. So we'll take our list props and we'll go props.join, and we'll join it with a comma, and I think it should render. Oh, tomorrow should also have 3 tasks, so I'll just add one in quick, something, and I'll just copy and redo this. And actually there's still a build error. Oh, I think it's because I have to do props.tasks.join. Yeah, there we go. Props.tasks.join. I actually have to grab the tasks because props is actually an object of all of my props. So if I had another prop here, then it wouldn't know which one to grab. So I have to specify that we're grabbing the tasks. So now it should work. Let's try it. Yep, use default props. So we define default props by doing this. We can do my component, which is shopping cart. So we'll put shopping cart here. And then we define default props with .default props. And in this case, we want to set items instead of location. We want items, and we want it to be set to 0 at the start. So now there should be a props.items, which equals 0. I tend to not use this at all because I think there's a better way to do it. But yeah, I guess they're just showing us this way to do it. And let's try it. Yep, override default props. So now default props of quantity is 0 for items. So right here it's rendering 0 because it's not being passed in as a prop. So for this challenge, we want to set that to 10. So we'll do quantity here equals 10, and now it equals 10 here instead of 0 because it overrides the default. So let's try that out. Yep, use prop types to define the props you expect. So again, this is something that I don't really use, but they're showing us anyways. So the way we want to do this is we want to take our items component and we want to set its prop types equal to an object, and this object is going to have our quantity in here. So I'll do quantity, and what it's going to be is a prop types dot number, and it's also going to be required, so we'll do dot is required on it as well. And that should be all we have to do for this one. So now we're just defining items to have a prop type of quantity always because it's required. Otherwise it'll throw an error if it doesn't have it. So I guess I'll try that if I comment this out. I guess it's not throwing an error, but in a real application it actually would, unless I did something wrong here. But let's try it out anyways. Yep, I guess I didn't do anything wrong, but it wasn't throwing an error. Kind of weird, but we'll live with it. Access props using this.props. This is how we access props in a class component. So in this example, we have 2 class components, return temp password and reset password. And reset password is the parent class of return temp password. So what we want to do is we want to put return temp password in here as a component, and then we want to pass a prop of temp password. So I'll go temp password equals, and it's going to be a string of 8 characters. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then within the child of return temp password, we're going to access that property, and we're going to access it within the strong tag. So first we'll do brackets to indicate JavaScript, and then we'll grab this dot props dot our temporary password. So temp password. And there's our temp password, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So yeah, this is another reason why I like to use functional components instead of class components. We don't have to do this dot props. We can just grab it from our parameter list. And I don't really like the way they did this with class-based components. It's just a little bit too cumbersome to have to write this all the time. But there is kind of a way to get around that with class-based components, and I'm sure it'll come up soon. But yeah, let's just move on. Yep. Review using props with stateless functional components. So they just want us to do a review of this. And basically for this challenge, we want to have a default property on this camper component. So we'll do camper.default props equals an object of name camperbot. And then we want to make a camper component. So I guess we'll go const camper equals a function that returns whatever you want. We'll put props in the argument list and we'll return a div with our default prop in it. So we'll go props.camper or props.name. And I think I did default props wrong here. Maybe get rid of the equal sign. No, maybe I have to put it below. Yep, so the default props has to go below the actual component. And we also want to do camper.PropTypes to make our name required. So we'll go name is prop type, or what is it? PropType.string that is required. What is it? Is it prop type? I forgot how to do this. What is this word here? Is it just prop? No, here. Oh, okay. It's prop types capitalized, like prop types, both capitalized. And there we go. Now it should work. I just had to look that up quick. So it's okay if you have to look stuff up. It's impossible to remember everything. So let's just run this, and it doesn't work because I need a P element. So I'll just change this div to a P and then it should work. And now let's go. Yep. Create a stateful component. In React, we can have state that defines our data inside of the component. And for this challenge, we want to put this.state inside of our constructor, and we'll set that to an object. And this is going to be the data that we have in this component. And we're going to set name equal to our name. And now this.state.name renders out my name of Landon Schlung. And that's all we had to do for this one. So let's move on. Yep. Render state in the user interface. So now we want to actually render out this FreeCodeCamp here. So to do that, we'll first define an h1 tag to put it in. And then inside of that, we'll do our curly braces that indicate JavaScript. And we'll grab this.state. So this component's state, and we're grabbing the name. So this.state.name. Or we could even do bracket notation here. So we could do name like that, and it would still work. So yeah, that's all we have to do for this one. Let's move on. Yep. Render state in the user interface another way. So in this render method before the return statement, we can define a variable called our name, and we can set it to this.state.name. And then that way, when we actually return it, we can just call name instead of doing this.state.name every time. So we'll do an h1 again, and then we'll put name in here, and it does the same exact thing. So let's run that. Yep. Set state with this.setState. So this is how we actually change the state inside of our component. So once we click this button, we want it to change our state to equal name to React Rocks. So to do that, we'll first define this.setState. So we'll call this method, and then we'll put in a new object of what we want our state to be. And the new state will be name of React Rocks. And now when we click this button, it should change this to React Rocks, and it does. So that works great. If we had more stuff here, like, I don't know, age, and we had it as 0, then changing this.setState wouldn't actually change the age. It would just stay the same. We would actually have to set age as something else, and then it would change it. So basically, it only changes the part that you define. So in this case, we just put name here, so it'll just change the name, and it won't change the age. Like, it won't get rid of it or anything. So that's what we had to do for this. Let's move on. Yep, bind this to a class method. This is just something that we have to do for these class methods. It's kind of stupid, and I don't really recommend doing this all the time because there's better ways to do this. But for this challenge, all they want us to do is add this code in here so that our handle click works. And it still doesn't work, I guess. Oh, I have to do this dot handle click equals this dot handle click dot bind this, and now it should work. No? What the heck? Maybe I need a semicolon? No? Oh, I know why. It's because this button doesn't have an on-click handler. So we have to do on-click here and then put in handle click, this dot handle click, and now it should work. Yep, okay, cool. So yeah, usually React isn't really this cumbersome. It just is for this challenge because they're doing it a weird way. Hopefully we can get to a better way of doing it. So let's just move on. Yep. Use state to toggle an element. In this case, they want us to have it so that when we click this, something shows up, and then when we click it again, it disappears again. So right here is our on-click handler of this.toggle visibility, and that's going to be our function. So we're going to do toggle visibility, and it's going to be our function. And what does it do is going to set our visibility to true instead of, or it's going to set visibility to whatever it's not. So we're going to do this dot set state, and we're going to set our state to be visibility to be not this dot visibility. And then that way when visibility is false, then it will set it to true. And if it's true, then it'll set it to false. And then we also have to bind it. So I'll just do this quick. And actually, instead of doing this dot set state like this, we actually want to have it be a function. So it's going to be state that it's basically the previous state that's being put into it. And then we can grab not state.visibility. And I think there should be parentheses around this. And now let's see if it works. Yep, it becomes visible and then it disappears. It becomes visible and then disappears again. So that's what we wanted. Let's try it out. Yep, write a simple counter. Now we want to make something where if we click increment, then it goes up 1. If we click decrement, then it goes down 1. And then sets it back to 0. So to do this, we have our 3 functions of increment, decrement, and reset. And we need to bind them all, and we have to define them all. So I guess I'll define them first. Increment is a function, decrement is a function, and reset is a function. And then I'll bind them. There we go. Now they're all binded. Now we have to define the logic in here, and it's going to be changing the count state. So we're going to do this dot set state. We'll take our previous state and we'll do a function to change the state. So now count is going to equal state plus 1, state.count plus 1. And then we'll kind of do the same thing for decrement. Instead, it's going to be -1. And then we'll do the same thing for reset, except it's going to be 0. And we actually can just do, I'll get rid of semicolons as well. We actually don't even need the arrow function in here. We can just pass an object of count equals 0. And I think it should work now. Let's try it. Yep, increment works, decrement works, and reset goes back to 0. Cool. And it should work for this one. Let's try it. Yep, cool. Create a controlled input. So now we're gonna see how we can make a input and then change the input in the state based on the text that we put into the input. So to start this off, we're gonna add an input here, and it's gonna have a onChange equal to a function that we define of handle change. And then we're gonna have our function up here of handle change. Open that up, and we want it to change the input in the state. And it also takes in an event of E. It's just something that comes with it. Any input gives a default parameter of E, which is, it's like an event type. And what we can do to get the value inside the input is by doing e.target.value, and that will actually grab the value of what's inside the input. But also for this input, we want its type to be text, and we want its value equal to this dot state.input. Get rid of this, see if it shows up. I'll bind this dot handle change. Oh, also make sure it's this dot handle change down here, and now it shows up. And I can't type into it right now because it's not changing the value of this dot state.input. So first I have to do this dot set state here, and we want to change the input equal to e.target.value, which is the value of the input that we put in. And now I can type into it and it shows up right here. So that is pretty awesome if you ask me. So basically how this works is once I change something here, it triggers this onChange function of this dot handle change, goes up here, takes the event parameter, and it sets input of this dot state equal to that value. So now it'll be this, and then it updates the value of this input to equal that, and it also updates this key tag down here to be that as well. So let's try that out. Yep, cool. Create a controlled form. So now in this challenge, we kind of want to do the same thing that we did in the last challenge, except now it's going to be inside a form with a onSubmit handler. So we're going to define our input here, which is going to be of type of text, and it's going to have a value equal to our this dot state of input right here. And it's also going to have a function that it calls onChange. So onChange, so every time it changes, we want it to call this dot handle change. So that I'll call this event here. And then when we hit submit, we want it to do something. But first of all, we want to do event.prevent default. This is just something that we have to do every time we submit a form so that it prevents a refresh of the page. It's just something that we have to do. Can't really explain it. And what we want to do inside of this then is change this dot state. So we're going to do this dot set state, and we want to change the submit part to be whatever's in our input. So this dot state dot input. And then we want to render it as an H1. So we'll go down here and we'll go H1, and then we'll put in our this.state.submit. And now when we type into this text box and then hit submit, it should show up. Yep, cool. So that should be what we had to do here, and let's move on. Yep, pass state as props to child components. Here we have two components of my app and navbar, and my app is the parent because it renders navbar, and we want to put the state as part of its props. So we're going to do name equals, and then we're going to pass this .state.name. So it'll pass camperbot down, and now name equals camperbot. So now when we do this .props here to grab the props, and then we grab the name part, then it'll show up as camperbot. So first we put in our name into the nav bar, which is this, by calling this .state.name, and then we grab the name property by doing this .props.name, and that'll grab this value right here and put it here, which is camperbot. And let's run that test. Yep, pass a callback as props. There's a lot of stuff we have to do for this challenge, so let's get started. First of all, we want to render get input here. So we're going to do get input and close it up. So now we're rendering this component right here. And we also want to put render input right here as well. So that'll render whatever we put in the input once we connect things up. We want to give get input a prop of input, and it's going to be the input value right here. So we're going to grab it by doing this .state.input value. And then we're also going to have a prop of handle change, and that's going to equal our actual function up here of this handle change. So now we're passing this function as a prop of get input, and what get input is doing is it's actually calling that handle change method by doing this .props.handle change, and that's actually calling this event. And we also want to have input equal to this state.input value for render input as well. And I believe now when we type stuff here, it puts it in here. So that's great. So yeah, this stuff is a little bit more complicated. We pass in our input and our handle change method into get input, and get input grabs the input and puts it as a value of the input, and it also calls the handle change method when it's passed in, which does this and updates our input value. And then render input grabs that input value and renders it on the screen by grabbing it with this .props.input. So that's all we had to do for this. Let's move on. Yep, cool. Use the lifecycle method component will mount. So now we're going to get into lifecycle methods, and basically component will mount will run whenever a component will mount, and it will also be deprecated in the future, so not super useful, I guess. But basically all we want to do here is do console.log, and we'll console log whatever we want, and then move on. Yep, component did mount. This is another lifecycle method, and it's mostly used for doing API calls, and all we want to do is render our active users. So we'll go this state.activeUsers, and there it waited 2.5 seconds before it actually showed up because we're doing a set timeout on it. But yeah, basically this will run whenever this component does mount, and let's run it. Yep, add event listeners. So in the component did mount method, this lifecycle method, it's the best place to attach any event listeners that we need. And I personally don't really do this, but they want us to do this for the challenge. And I guess what we're supposed to do is do document.add event listener inside of this. And it takes the event in quotes as the first argument. So that will be key down. And it takes the callback as the second argument, which is handle key press. And I wonder if we have to do this handle key press, possibly. And then in the component will unmount lifecycle method, we want to remove that event listener. So we'll do document.remove event listener, and we pass the same arguments to it. So I'll just copy these arguments and put it in the remove event listener part. And I think that's what we had to do here. I don't know, let's try it. Yep, I guess so. Cool. Optimize re-renders with should component update. So should component update takes in a next props and next state. And we can do some logic in here to say if we want this component to update or not. And basically we want this only evens component to update if its prop of value is even. So I guess we'll do an if statement in here of if this dot props or this dot, or maybe do next props. If next props dot value modulus 2 equals 0, then return true, otherwise return false, maybe. I'm not super sure about this. Let's see if, okay, that works, I guess. So it's calling this every time. Should I update? So it's calling that twice, and then it actually re-renders once it's even. So I believe this works for this one, and let's try it out. Yep, cool. Introducing inline styles. Inline styles are stuff that you can do in JSX, and They're done like this in regular HTML, but they are done like this inside of our JSX. So what we want to do is we want to take our div and give it a style of text color red and font size of 72 pixels. And to do that, we'll define our style inside of our div tag. So we'll go in our div tag, do style equals, and then we're going to do a double curly braces. The first curly brace is to say that it's JavaScript, and the curly braces inside of it say that it's an object. So our style object is going to be color, and the color in quotes, it has to be in quotes, is going to be red. And then we also want our font size in camel case. Instead of with CSS it's font dash style or font dash size, but in JSX it's camel case. We want our font size to be 72 pixels, and that also has to be in quotes. And there we go. There's our newly formatted text of big red. Let's try that out. Yep. Add inline styles in React. So for this challenge we want to uncomment this line of const styles, and we want to set it to our style object that we want to pass into this style part right here. And the stuff we want inside of it is we're going to do color of purple, a font size, camel case, of 40 pixels, and we're going to do a border of 2 pixels, solid purple. And then instead of doing this color yellow and font size 24, we're just going to pass our styles object into it. And there, it picked up the styles of this constant. So let's try that out. Nope, it didn't work because font size should be just 40. So in this case, we don't want to use quotes here, and we just want to set 40. Even though it's still just 40 pixels, they want us to do this for the test. So there, now it works. Use advanced JavaScript in React render method. So in this challenge, we have a magic 8-ball type dealio, and we want to go down to line 52 and change answer to equal one of these, I believe. So how do we do that is we grab our possible answers. So we'll grab our possible answers, and we want to grab one of their indexes, and it's not going to be any old index. It's going to be our random index that we have in this.state right here, random index, and we set it when we click a button or something. So we're going to do possible answer of this.state random index, and then we want to insert the answer const inside the p tags. So down here we'll grab answer, and it's not building, and I think it's because random index is empty right now before we ask. So maybe if I set this to 0 first. No, oh, possible answers, there we go. Ask the magic 8-ball. It should be giving me something here, but it's not. Let's try console logging our this.state.random index. So yeah, it's not changing our random index when I click this button. Maybe I need something here. Oh, there we go. Now it changed it. My reply is no. So it grabbed this one. Oh, it's because I need user input in here, because it's doing an if there's a user input, then actually give a random index and also reset the user input. All right, I believe we got this done. Let's move on. Yep, render with an if-else condition. So here we want to do render, and then if our state.display is true, then we want to render this. So then we'll return it. Otherwise, we'll return something else. We're going to return our markup, so whatever's here, minus our h1. And now when we click this, then it'll toggle the display. So yeah, that's what we had to do for this one. Let's try it. Yep. Use the logical and for a more concise conditional. This is because JavaScript short circuits are conditionals. We're going to only render displayed if display equals true. So what we want to do here is we want to do our brackets to indicate JavaScript, and inside of this we want to grab our display, so this.state.display, and if that is true, then we want to render this h1 tag. If it's false, then it will just move on. But if it's true, then it will have to do whatever this is. And this is because JavaScript short circuits. So again, if it's false, then it has no need to move on to check this condition, because it already knows that this one's false, and because it's an and, then it doesn't matter what this is, it's still going to be false. And that's why this works. And it works the same as it did before, except it's way easier. So let's try that out. Yep. Use a ternary expression for conditional rendering. So this is a lot like the logical and part, except it allows for a condition to be false. Then we can return something else. And what we want to do in this challenge, first of all, we want to have this.state in here, and we want it to equal a check users age, and we're going to set it to an empty string, and it's also going to have a input of empty string. And then what we want to do is we want to, when the page first loads, render the submit button 1 to the page. So I guess we'll put button 1 here, and then when a user enters their age and clicks the button, render a different button. Oh, we actually want the check user age state to be just user age. And then what we can do is we want to check user age. So if user age is not an empty string, then we want to render a button 2, else render button 1. If user age does not equal an empty string, no. Oh, this dot state dot user age. All right, so there now we can submit our age and submit it, and then it renders our button 2. But we actually want to render a different button based on that age. So if the age is a number less than 18, then we want to render button 3. So I guess we need another ternary operator in here. So we're going to do a nested ternary, which is not recommended, but I guess we'll do it for this challenge. So we'll do this dot state dot age dot user age is greater than, or if it's less than 18, then we want to render button 2. No, then we want to render button 3. Otherwise we'll do button 2, and I think that's what we had to do here. So if we do 18, or if we do 14, then it says you shall not pass. If we do 20, then it says you may enter, and I believe that's what we had to do. Again, I would not recommend doing this ternary operator like this because it's nested and it's very confusing and hard to follow. But that's what they wanted us to do for this challenge, so let's just move on. Yep. Render conditionally from props. So first of all, for this challenge, we want to go down to line 30 or 29. I think what they want us to do here is do a ternary operator of math.random greater than or equal to 0.5. And then if that's true, they want us to render game of chance, or they want us to render results or something. Otherwise, nothing. No, I guess what we want to do is we want to pass results in, and it's going to have a prop of 50-50, which is going to equal our expression. But maybe expression is supposed to be our ternary operator. So I think I'm going to move this to be here. And if it's true, expression is going to be you win. Otherwise, it's going to be you lose. And then I'm just going to have our results down here of 50-50. Well, basically what we want to do is when we click this, it'll have a 50-50 chance of saying you win or you lose. So this is kind of the wrong way to go about this, or maybe it's not. I guess in results, we should render the expression. So we'll go this dot props dot 50-50. So I guess we lose, play again, you win. Oh, okay, I guess it does work now. And it also says change this counter. And I guess what they want us to do for this counter is increment it by 1 every time. So to do that, we'll have our state get passed into it, and then we'll have counter equal state.counter plus 1. And now when I hit play again, it does our turn, and now it should work. Oh no, let's see if it works. Yep, I guess it works. Cool. Yeah, this one, it's directions are very unclear. But yeah, just basically just do this and you should be good. Change inline CSS conditionally based on a component state. So when the user types more than 15 characters, we want to set the input border style to be 3 pixel solid red. And to do that, we'll do input style equals our this dot state dot input greater than or equal to 15 characters, or input.length greater than or equal to 15 characters. Then we want our input style to equal border of 3 pixels solid red. Maybe I need parentheses around this. We might have to do a ternary here, I guess. So we'll do question mark, and then otherwise it'll just stay the same. So I'll just copy this over. And now if I type too much, then it should turn red. Yep. And I think it should just be greater, not greater than or equal. So yeah, I guess this one we had to use the ternary instead of just logical and let's try it out. Yep, cool. Use array.map to dynamically render elements. For this challenge, they want us to have a this.state part in the constructor, and it's going to equal a user input equal to an empty string instead colon, and it's also going to have a to-do list that's going to equal an empty array to start off with. And then down in our items, const items, where it says change code here, we want to delete the null and instead do to-do items.map, or this.state, first of all, to-do list.map. So we're going to map over this array, and we're going to have our to-do, and we're going to render a li for each one. So do an li, and then we'll put in our to-do for that. So I guess now when we put some stuff into this text box, we should see it. Create list, and there's our list. So that's what we had to do for this one. They do a lot of the stuff for us to make this happen, but all we had to do was map over our array and create a li for each one. And that's what they render right here with our items. So let's move on. Yep, give sibling elements a unique key attribute. This is something that we have to do for React. For this challenge, we want to map over our front-end frameworks. So we'll do front-end frameworks.map, and we'll map each framework to our arrow function, and we're going to return an li for each one. So we'll put framework in here inside of our brackets, and there they show up. Except inside of our li tag, we want to give it a key equal to the framework again. This is just something internally that React uses to make sure that these are all rendered in the same order every time, and it has to be a unique key every time. Otherwise it will do some weird stuff. But yeah, just make sure that when you map over stuff that the outside tags have a key equal to a unique value. Let's run that. Yep, use array.filter to dynamically filter an array. So here's our big array. We want to render only the ones that are online, so where online equals true. And to do that, we'll grab our users online, and we'll set it to this.state.users.filter, and we'll grab each user, and we're going to check if that user.online equals true, or if it's just user.online. It should work. And then we want to render it by doing it right here. So our const of render online. Right now it equals null, but we want to equal our users online dot map, and we'll map each user again and return an li of each user, and it'll be the user dot username actually. Oh, users online, not user online. So yeah, these are all of our users that are online. We have Jeff, which is online, which is true. We have Mary, which is online, and Sarah and Laura. And we also want to give a key to this li. So give a key to this list item equal to our user.username, just something internal that React uses. It doesn't actually show up, and I believe that's all we had to do for this one. So yeah, the filter method, we just want the users that are online, and since online is already a boolean, we can just do user.online instead of doing user.online equals true. We can just do user.online, and let's run that. Yep, cool. Render React on the server with render to string. I personally have never used this before, so this is completely new to me. But for this challenge, they want us to use this render to string method, which is provided on React DOM server. So I'm guessing we have to do React DOM server dot render to string and then pass in our app. And I think that'll work. Apparently this is useful for search engines so that they can index our page and so that more people can find our website. But yeah, personally I've never used it. Let's just try it out, and that did not work. Maybe I have to have it as the component, so I'll do app and then I'll close it up as a tag. So now let's try it. Yep, okay, so that's what we had to do. And there we go, we completed all of the React challenges. That was a lot of them. Definitely React is very useful. I would definitely recommend going deeper into it and learning function-based components and learning all the React hooks that they have out there, and maybe doing some projects on your own. The FreeCodeCamp React challenges are a little bit outdated in my opinion, because React has changed so much in the past year, or really since it started. It's just completely changed kind of. But yeah, next up we have our Redux challenges, which is something that's used with React, and it's basically to handle our data better. And Redux is definitely way more confusing than React is. So if we were struggling with React, Redux is definitely going to be a challenge. And probably these challenges won't really make much sense. But I'll help you go through them, and hopefully we can get through it together. I've used Redux before, but it's definitely not the easiest thing to use. So anyways, that's going to do it for me today, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.